My son told me to get a job or stop eating under his roof. I thought he was joking, until he threw my dinner in the trash. So I did what he said, but not in the way he expected. My name is Harold Whitaker, 71 years old, retired engineer, widower, and apparently, now, a burden. I never thought I'd use that word to describe myself, but life has a cruel way of teaching humility. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Even to those who once led others. After my wife Margaret passed away last winter, my son Daniel invited me to move in with him until I get back on my feet. He said it kindly then, but kindness can fade faster than you think. The first few days were quiet. Daniel had his own family now, a wife, Allison, and 2 kids who spent more time with their tablets than with people. I tried to stay out of the way, helping with small chores, fixing a squeaky door hinge here, tightening a kitchen cabinet screw there. But soon I began noticing the looks, the sighs, the way Allison would glance at Daniel when I sat at the dinner table. One evening, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. She whispered, "He eats like he pays the bills." Daniel replied, "He's my father. What do you want me to do, throw him out?" That word, throw, lodged itself deep inside me. I didn't say anything. I just kept to my room, reading the same pages of my old engineering journal over and over. Then one morning, I walked into the kitchen for coffee. Daniel was sitting at the table, dressed for work, scrolling through his phone. Without looking up, he said, "Dad, we need to talk." His tone was cold, rehearsed. I waited. He sighed. "I can't keep feeding you forever. I mean, you've got to do something, right? Get a job. Keep yourself busy." I laughed softly, thinking he was teasing. "Daniel," I said, "I'm 71. He shrugged. "There are old guys greeting people at Walmart. You can't just sit here watching TV all day. I've got bills, a family." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Like I was some stranger taking advantage of him. "I'm not asking for much," I said quietly. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. "No, Dad, you're not asking. You're assuming." The silence that followed was worse than shouting. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the picture of Margaret on my nightstand. She'd always been my anchor, the voice that reminded me who I was. Without her, I felt adrift. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my old briefcase, still filled with yellowing documents, patents, blueprints, performance awards. Once upon a time, people shook my hand with respect. Now my own son couldn't even look me in the eye. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I made myself a cup of black coffee and looked out the window at the faint glow of the rising sun. I thought about leaving, maybe finding a small apartment somewhere, but my savings were tied up in medical bills and funeral costs. Then I saw Daniel coming downstairs, already dressed for work. He grabbed his keys, poured himself coffee, and as he passed me, he said flatly, "Don't wait up for dinner tonight. We're eating out." I nodded. Understood. The moment the door shut, something in me shifted. The humiliation had burned long enough. It was time to remember who I used to be. I put on my old gray suit, brushed my thinning hair, and stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp. It woke me up more than the coffee did. I took the 8:15 bus downtown. Every bump on the road rattled through my knees, but I didn't care. I was heading to a place I hadn't seen in years. West Aero Systems, the aerospace firm where I had spent most of my career. The building looked different now. Glass walls, digital displays, young faces rushing in and out like they had the world to build. I approached the front desk. The young security guard looked up from his monitor. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "Could you tell Dr. Sonia Patel that Harold Whitaker is here to see her?" He blinked, unsure. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but tell her it's an old mentor." He made the call. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and a woman in her 40s rushed out. Professional suit, sharp eyes, a warm smile that instantly took me back decades. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, breathless, "you came." She hugged me like family. Sonia Patel, my former intern from 25 years ago. She'd been a nervous, brilliant young engineer once, always second-guessing her designs. Now she was West Aero's chief technical officer. We talked for hours in her office, about Margaret, about retirement, about Daniel. She listened with empathy that my own family seemed to have lost. And when I said I felt useless these days, she leaned forward and said something that stirred the ashes inside me back to flame. "Then maybe it's time to get useful again. Harold, we need people like you back. Our new engineers are smart, but inexperienced. They need guidance, your kind of guidance." I chuckled. "At my age?" "At your wisdom," she corrected. Her offer was genuine. She wanted me to come back as a consultant, part-time, mentoring new engineers. She even said, "You built this company's backbone. Come rebuild its future." I hesitated, but something inside me whispered, "Yes." By the end of that day, I'd signed a short-term contract. As I walked out of the building, briefcase in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: pride. When I got home that evening, Daniel was on the couch, half watching TV. He glanced at my suit and laughed. "Where'd you go, Dad? A job interview?" I smiled softly. "Something like that." He shook his head, chuckling. "Well, good luck with that." He had no idea. As I walked past him to my room, I couldn't help but think, maybe sometimes the best lessons aren't taught through words, but through quiet proof. And mine was only beginning.
The next few days were strange. My son, Daniel, acted as if nothing had happened. He left early for work, came home late, sometimes with takeout for his wife and kids, never for me. I didn't complain. I'd learned that silence carries its own kind of power. Each morning, I'd dress neatly, pack my old leather briefcase, and head downtown. I didn't tell Daniel where I was going. I didn't owe him that explanation anymore. The bus driver started greeting me with a nod, as though he knew I was a man with purpose again. Maybe he did. When I arrived at West Aero Systems, the scent of coffee and polished steel filled the air. The building's lobby gleamed under bright LED lights, and the walls were lined with photographs of the company's innovations, satellite prototypes, launch modules, and even a few plaques from projects I'd worked on decades ago. It felt strange to walk those halls again, older, slower, grayer, but alive.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Dr. Sonia Patel greeted me each morning with that familiar energy of hers, determined and sharp. She'd already arranged my workstation, a clean desk, a company laptop, and my name printed neatly on a silver plaque, Harold Whitaker, Senior Technical Mentor. When I first sat down, several young engineers peeked over from nearby cubicles. They probably wondered who the old man was. I smiled, introduced myself, and within minutes they were asking questions, not out of pity, but out of curiosity. One of them, a bright kid named Kevin, asked if I'd really helped design the early prototype for the Eagle guidance system. When I said yes, his eyes widened. "That's legendary," he said. "We studied your work in college." I tried not to smile too wide. It felt good to be remembered, not as a burden, but as a builder. By the end of that week, I'd fallen into a rhythm. Morning coffee, bus ride, teaching sessions, design reviews, late lunches with Sonia. My mind was sharp again, my purpose restored. I even started taking notes for a potential mentorship program to train young engineers in practical problem solving. Still, I hadn't told Daniel. I wanted him to learn the truth the right way, not through words, but through reality. One Friday afternoon, Sonia stopped by my desk. "You've done incredible work, Harold," she said. "In fact, we're restructuring the department, and I want you to head the new mentorship division, officially." I blinked. "Department head?" She smiled. "It's just a title, but it means the younger engineers report to you now. You'll oversee their training. The board already approved it." I sat there quietly for a moment, letting it sink in. After months of feeling invisible, someone had not only seen me, they'd entrusted me with leadership again. "Thank you, Sonia," I said softly. "Don't thank me. You earned this long before I ever did." When I left that evening, I received an email on my phone. Subject: Welcome Back Event, Monday, 9 a.m. Details: Introducing Department Head, Harold Whitaker. I didn't realize it then, but that email would change everything. That night, when I returned home, Daniel was sitting in the living room with his laptop open. He looked frustrated, muttering to himself about work. I asked, "Rough day?" He exhaled sharply. "You could say that. They're restructuring my department. I was supposed to get promoted, but they said they're bringing in some consultant, some retired guy from the old program to take over. Unreal." My heart stopped for a moment. I kept my expression calm. "You work in aerospace design, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, West Aero Systems. Why?" I forced a small smile. "No reason." He groaned, rubbing his forehead. "Whoever this guy is, he better know what he's doing. Probably some out-of-touch fossil they dug up to save money." I didn't respond. I just walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of water, and took a long, steady sip to hide the grin tugging at my lips. The irony was so thick, it almost felt surreal. My son, the same man who told me to get a job, was about to work under me without even knowing it. That weekend, I spent time organizing my notes, ironing my shirts, polishing my shoes. It wasn't vanity. It was preparation. I wanted to walk into that building Monday morning with quiet dignity, not arrogance. Sunday night, Daniel was in a particularly foul mood. He said, "They said the new head starts tomorrow, another old guy who's going to slow everything down." I looked at him and said calmly, "Give him a chance. Sometimes the ones you underestimate surprise you." He shrugged dismissively. "We'll see." He had no idea how right I was. Monday morning came. I woke before sunrise, dressed in my best navy blue suit, and caught the early bus. The air was crisp, the city still waking up. When I arrived at West Aero, I took a deep breath before stepping inside. As I entered the main conference room, a group of engineers, Daniel among them, were already gathered. Their chatter quieted when they saw me. Daniel's eyes widened, his mouth slightly open as if the air had been sucked from the room. I placed my briefcase on the table and said with calm professionalism, "Good morning, everyone. I'm Harold Whitaker. I'll be overseeing the department moving forward." The silence was absolute. Then a faint murmur rippled across the room. Whispers, glances, disbelief. Daniel blinked rapidly. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Sonia entered and smiled warmly. "Team, meet our new department head, one of West Arrow's original architects. He'll be guiding all upcoming projects." The look on Daniel's face was indescribable. Shock, embarrassment, and something else, realization. I turned to the team and said, "Let's get to work." That was it. No smugness, no revenge, just purpose. Because the lesson had already begun. And for Daniel, it was only the first day.
Daniel didn't say much that first day. He sat in the conference room, eyes darting between me and his notes, pretending to be busy. But I could tell. Every click of his pen, every nervous glance, every tight-lipped sigh, the shock hadn't worn off. For the rest of the morning, I focused on the task at hand. The team had a critical design flaw to solve, a stabilization algorithm for a guidance module. I went through their presentation slide by slide, quietly analyzing the errors. It was the kind of work I used to live for. Complex, elegant, mathematical. Daniel cleared his throat halfway through and said, "Maybe we should just move forward with the algorithm we already have, sir. We've been working on it for weeks." I looked at him, not as a father, but as his department head. "Daniel, the current model misaligns under high-velocity rotation. If we proceed, we risk a full system failure. Let's correct the math first." The room was silent. You could feel the tension crackle like electricity. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. "Yes, sir," he muttered. It was strange hearing him call me sir. For years he'd spoken to me with impatience, sometimes contempt. Now every word carried the weight of respect, or at least the beginning of it. By lunch, the team was buzzing. A few of the engineers asked me for insights on older prototypes. I showed them archive designs, hand-drawn sketches from decades past. They listened, engaged, respectful. Even Daniel had to admit the improvements I proposed worked better. When the meeting ended, Sonia pulled me aside. "You handled that perfectly," she whispered. "You didn't embarrass him. You let him realize it himself." I smiled faintly. The best lessons are the ones that sting but heal. That evening, I stayed late reviewing data. Most of the staff had left, but I noticed Daniel lingering near the door. He stood there for a long moment before walking over. "So, this is where you've been going every morning?" he asked quietly. "Yes, since the day you told me to get a job." He looked down at the floor, shame creeping into his face. "Dad, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I was stressed. Work's been hard." "Daniel," I interrupted gently, "you didn't just tell me to get a job. You told me I wouldn't feed you. You made me feel like a burden." He rubbed the back of his neck, unable to meet my eyes. "I know. I said it out of frustration." "I understand frustration, but frustration doesn't excuse cruelty." He didn't answer. After a while, he simply said, "You're really my boss now?" I looked at him dead serious. "No, son. I'm your teacher." He gave a short,
bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. Guess I deserve that. You don't deserve punishment. You deserve perspective.
The next week was a lesson in humility for both of us. I watched Daniel struggle with the very same work I'd mastered decades earlier. He was competent, but impatient, brilliant at presentation, poor at perseverance. When problems got tough, he'd toss them aside, waiting for someone else to fix them. It reminded me of how he'd lived his life, always expecting things to work out without effort. I didn't scold him, I just guided him, quietly correcting his errors, pushing him to think deeper, harder, slower. One afternoon, during a technical review, I asked the team, "What do you do when the data doesn't match the outcome?" Daniel shrugged. "Recheck the formula?" I shook my head. "You question your assumptions. Sometimes the flaw isn't in the math, it's in the mindset." The younger engineers nodded thoughtfully. Daniel avoided my gaze. He knew I wasn't just talking about equations. By Friday, the project hit a breakthrough. The stabilization module worked perfectly in simulation, smoother and faster than expected. The team applauded, and Sonia clapped me on the shoulder. "Looks like the mentor still has a few tricks up his sleeve," she said with a grin. Daniel stayed behind after everyone left. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said quietly, "You fixed it." I smiled faintly. "We fixed it." He looked down, fidgeting with his ID badge. "I don't know what to say." I set my papers aside. "Then don't say anything. Just learn." There was something different in his eyes then. The arrogance had dimmed, replaced by something almost like gratitude. Later that weekend, as I sat on the porch of the small guest house Daniel had once let me stay in, I thought about how ironic life could be. The same son who saw me as useless now looked at me with respect, even a hint of awe. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted reconciliation. Still, I knew the hardest part was coming. Daniel's pride wasn't gone, it was just wounded. And sometimes wounded pride lashes out before it heals. That test arrived sooner than I expected. The following Monday, the company's regional director announced a surprise visit to assess the team's progress. If our department impressed her, the project would move into full production, meaning promotions, bonuses, and recognition across West Arrow. Daniel was desperate to lead the presentation. "Sir, let me handle it. You've done enough. Let me prove I can lead this team." I studied his face. For once, he wasn't asking to take credit. He genuinely wanted to earn it. "All right," I said finally. "It's your stage. Just remember what you've learned." He nodded, almost nervously, and began preparing slides late into the night. On presentation day, Daniel stood in front of the boardroom, confident at first, until the data glitch appeared on the main screen. The simulation crashed mid-demonstration. Gasps echoed across the room. I saw panic flash in his eyes. His voice faltered. For a brief moment, he looked like a boy again. Lost, afraid, helpless. That's when I stood up, walked beside him, and calmly reloaded the backup file. "Remember the redundancy protocol," I whispered. He took a deep breath, followed my lead, and within minutes, the simulation was running again, flawlessly. The director smiled, impressed. "Excellent recovery, gentlemen. I can see the leadership here is strong." Daniel exhaled, relief washing over him. When the meeting ended, he turned to me and said softly, "Thanks, Dad." I patted his shoulder. "Don't thank me. You just learned to stand again." As we left the room together, I could see it. The beginning of understanding in his eyes. The kind that only comes when arrogance finally gives way to humility. But neither of us knew that the real lesson, the one that would test both our hearts, was still ahead. The breakthrough presentation marked a shift in everything. The office now regarded Daniel and me as an unstoppable pair, the old genius and the young strategist. But beneath the praise and polite smiles, something fragile was forming between us,
an unspoken reconciliation, still balancing on the edge of pride and guilt. In the following weeks, Daniel began to change. He started arriving earlier than anyone else, taking notes during meetings and double-checking every figure. He asked questions, not to impress, but to understand. The arrogance that once clouded him had softened into curiosity. I'd catch him sometimes watching me work, quietly, almost studying how I approached problems. It reminded me of when he was little, when he'd sit beside me at the kitchen table, fascinated by the sketches I drew for aerospace designs. One evening, after a long day of calibrating the simulation models, Daniel stopped by my desk. "Dad," he said hesitantly, glancing around to make sure no one heard, "I've been thinking about what you said, about mindset." I looked up from the monitor. "Yes?" He sighed. "I realized I've been chasing promotions, not purpose. I thought success meant being above others, but watching you work, you're respected because you lift others up, not because you step on them." I studied him for a moment. "It's not too late to redefine what success means for you, son." He nodded, eyes heavy. "I know. I just wish I'd seen it sooner." That conversation stayed with me. For the first time, I saw Daniel not as the son who'd turned his back on me, but as a man struggling to rebuild his character. It made me proud and deeply hopeful. But fate, it seems, always tests the sincerity of our change. A month later, West Arrow announced a company-wide restructuring. Departments would be merged, positions reevaluated. Rumors spread like wildfire. Names would be cut, teams consolidated, and only those deemed indispensable would stay. Tension filled the air. The younger staff whispered in corners. Even Daniel seemed uneasy. "Dad," he said one afternoon, "they're bringing in new management. They might eliminate older staff, including you." I smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I'll finally retire for good." He frowned. "Don't say that. You've done more for this team than anyone." "I've had my time," I said calmly. "What matters is that you continue what we started." But Daniel wouldn't let it go. "I won't let them take your job, not after everything." The next few days were a blur of audits and evaluations. The new regional manager, a sharp, polished woman named Karen Holt, sat through our briefings, reviewing performance metrics with a cool, detached air. She was efficient, almost mechanical. On Friday, she called a meeting to announce the new organizational chart. My name was listed as Senior Technical Consultant, Retired Advisory, a polite way of saying phased out. Daniel's name, however, appeared beside the title Department Head. The room erupted in polite applause, but Daniel looked frozen, his face pale. He glanced at me helplessly. I simply nodded and smiled. "Congratulations, son." After the meeting, he rushed to find me in the hallway. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't ask for this." "I know, and I don't need to explain. This is how life works. One generation steps aside for the next." He shook his head, eyes burning. "Not like this. Not when you deserve the credit." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've earned your place, Daniel. I only taught you to see differently. The rest was you." But deep down, I felt a pang, not of envy or loss, but of quiet sorrow. I'd just started to rebuild a bridge to my son, and now life was asking me to walk away. The following Monday was my last official day. Sonia and the team threw a small farewell lunch. Laughter filled the room, though my heart felt heavy. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he stood, visibly emotional. He began, "I used to think my father was a burden, someone who didn't understand the world anymore. But I was blind. The truth is, he didn't just teach me how to do my job. He taught me how to be a better man. He reminded me that humility isn't weakness. It's wisdom." The room went silent. His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "I told him once that I wouldn't feed him. Today, I'd give him everything I have just to repay what he's done for me." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was heartfelt. I stood up, walked over, and hugged him. For the first time in years, we held each other as father and son. No pride, no anger, just love that had survived the fire. Later that evening, as the office lights dimmed, Daniel walked me to the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of amber and violet. He opened the car door for me. A simple gesture, but one that said everything words couldn't. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'll make you proud." I smiled, eyes glistening. "You already have." He hesitated, then asked, "Will you still visit the office sometimes?" I chuckled. "Only if you promise not to make me wear a badge again." We both laughed softly, the tension finally gone. Then I started the engine and drove away, watching him in the rearview mirror, standing tall, composed, but different now. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was a man shaped by humility, forged by consequence, and tempered by grace. That night, as I sat alone on the porch, the city lights flickering in the distance, I thought about the strange way life works. Sometimes it breaks us apart so it can rebuild us stronger. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who end up learning from the wound they caused. And sometimes the deepest revenge is not humiliation, it's transformation. Daniel had learned, and because of that, I finally felt peace. But as I looked out into the night sky, I couldn't help but wonder what he would do with the power he now held, whether he'd carry my lessons forward or let the world's weight turn him cold again. For now, though, I chose to believe in him. Because once upon a time, he forgot what it meant to be a son, and now he was learning what it meant to be a man.
Months passed. The seasons changed, and with them, so did our lives. Daniel had grown into his role with purpose and quiet confidence. Under his leadership, West Arrow flourished, and I found peace in the rhythm of ordinary days again. My mornings were calm, my porch chair creaked the same way it always had, and the sound of life outside no longer felt distant. Then one crisp November morning, I received a letter. It bore the West Arrow seal and Daniel's signature. "Dad, you once told me leadership isn't about being served, but about serving others. I've built something with your words in mind. Come see it." Attached was a small metallic badge, a visitor's pass. Curious, I took the bus downtown once more. As I entered the building, I noticed a new plaque mounted near the lobby entrance. It read, "Whitaker Mentorship Lab, inspiring the next generation of innovators." My breath caught. The photos displayed on the wall were snapshots of my years at West Arrow, me teaching, working with the team, guiding the young engineers. But right in the center was a framed quote in bold letters. "When life tells you you're too old to dream, dream anyway." It was something I'd once told Daniel on a night long ago when he was still just a boy building toy planes out of scrap cardboard. As I walked deeper into the new lab, I saw young engineers bustling around, students from the local university, interns from across the country, all part of a program Daniel had created. They were learning, designing, failing, and trying again the same way I had once taught him. And there he was, my son, standing at the front, talking to a group of interns. When he saw me, his face softened into a warm smile. He dismissed the group and walked toward me. "You came," he said. "I had to see this for myself," I replied, taking in the sight around me. "You've built something incredible." He nodded. "You built it first, Dad. I just finished what you started."
We stood there quietly, side by side, surrounded by a generation of dreamers who'd never know the story behind the name on the plaque. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the lesson had survived. Daniel continued softly, "I used to think power meant control. Now I know it means responsibility. You didn't just teach me engineering. You taught me how to lead with compassion." I smiled. "You learned the hard way, but you learned well." He looked at me then, not as a superior, not as a son weighed by guilt, but as a man filled with gratitude. "Dad, I'll make sure no one ever forgets what you stood for." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then my work here is done." As I turned to leave, he called out, "Hey, before you go, I signed the paperwork to make you an honorary consultant again. The interns requested it. They said they want to learn from the legend himself." I laughed, shaking my head. "Legend? I'm just an old man who refused to stay silent when life told him to stop." "Exactly. That's what makes you one." The two of us stood there for a moment, smiling. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me a small, folded piece of paper. "Grandpa, will you teach me how to build a plane like Dad used to?" It was written in crayon, with tiny, uneven letters, my grandson's handwriting. I felt tears sting my eyes. Generations, once divided by pride and distance, were connecting through something as simple and as powerful as curiosity. I looked at Daniel. "Seems like the family business isn't done with me yet." He grinned. "Guess not." We both laughed, and in that moment, everything, every harsh word, every regret, every wound melted away. Because forgiveness, when it finally arrives, doesn't roar like thunder. It whispers softly in shared smiles, in second chances, and in sons who finally understand their fathers. Weeks later, I sat on my porch again, the same place where I'd once felt forgotten. But this time, Ethan sat beside me, holding a model airplane kit. "Grandpa, did Dad really tell you to get a job?" I chuckled. "He did, and I got one." He laughed. "As his boss?" I winked. "Something like that." We both laughed until the sound of it carried across the yard, blending with the hum of life. And as I looked up at the sky, at that endless blue canvas where dreams still flew, I realized the truth. Life has a way of coming full circle. Sometimes it humbles you to dust before lifting you higher than you ever imagined. Sometimes it breaks a family apart just to show it how to rebuild on stronger ground. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's grace. Because when you rise after being pushed down and do it with dignity instead of anger, the world can't help but notice. So if anyone ever tells you you're too old, too useless, or too late, smile, stand tall, and prove them wrong with silence that speaks louder than any insult could ever.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.